So hello and welcome to the 2022 Ohioana Book Festival and my stellar basement. Hopefully all of you are comfortable and ready for an amazing webinar, author reading with some amazing authors here. You are here with us for the Thrills and Chills for Teens and Tweens panel. We'd like to thank our festival sponsors and partners, all of whom you can find listed on the Ohioana website. And thanks to our official bookseller, the Book Loft of German Village. You can get copies of all of the books featured at the festival by going online to the Bookloft or to bookloft.com. Don't put the. I highly recommend them all, but just know that you will be staying up late and you might sleep with the light on. True story. My name is Meg Brown and I work at Thurber House, and I am delighted to introduce our panelists for today. Like I said, they catch me up late into the hours, turning pages and sleeping with lights on. I'm also going to put their websites in the chat in a little bit, so you can find more information about them and all of their books. Many of them have several books as well. And we want this to be very interactive. I know that we aren't able to be in person, but we want you to ask as many questions as you want. So please put them in the Q&A, and I will read them to the authors as they come up. I will start with the kickoff question for all the authors, but please fill the Q&A. We want this to be interactive. We want to hear the questions from all of you, not just what's burning in my head. No one wants that. So to get us started, I'm just randomly going to introduce the authors to all of you. First, I'm going to kick it off with Margaret Peterson Haddix. She has written over 40 books, including several series and standalones. She is joining us with her latest, The School for Whatnots. That seriously messed with my head. I have so many questions, Margaret. She heralds from a long line of farmers and bookworms, where the phrase, "Would you guys stop reading for a minute and look out the window," was passed down for generations. After spending years in journalism, she decided to move to fiction when she realized she would have to have her husband as her boss and thought that might not be a good idea. Fun fact from her page, I discovered she showed hogs at the county fair. Also, if you go to her website, she has fabulous photos of her growing up, and I highly recommend it. Next up, we have Mindy Mcginnis, who is carrying the tradition of coming from a farm. She is a 9th generation farmer. Much of her writing reflects small town living and aspects of rural poverty. Mindy is a former school librarian who is passionate about making herself available to financially disadvantaged school districts and communities. Mindy is sharing with us her latest, The Last Laugh, which is the sequel to The Initial Insult and conclusion to the duology. Fun fact, her favorite character in The Initial Insult was the cat. And I use that as the fun fact because I listened to the audiobook for that one, and the cat's voice was terrifying. I don't know if anybody listens to the audiobook, but it was very menacing. Next, we have Mar Romasco Moore. Mar is with us for their latest, I Am the Ghost in Your House. They are also the author of Crazyland that is forthcoming and Some Kind of Animal, as well as Ghostographs, an interconnected collection of flash fiction inspired by vintage photographs, which is really cool. They currently teach writing at Columbus College of Art and Design. Fun fact, I Am the Ghost in Your House was listed in Book Riot's 15 LGBTQ books out this month you need to read for the month of April. And I'm a huge fan of Book Riot, so when I saw your book on it, I was so excited. Big deal. And next we have Natalie D Richards. Natalie does not come from a farming family. Sorry to break that dream. But she is a lifelong Ohioan and broke out of writing stunningly boring business documents, a quote from her, to create riveting stay up past your bedtime YA thrillers. Her latest, 7 Deadly Secrets, takes the reader on a fast-paced hunt for answers throughout Columbus. Fun fact, she has 2 dogs named Yeti and Wookie. And apparently together they weigh 160 pounds. That was the fun fact I got. So welcome all of you. I am really, really excited to be here. I jumped on this panel the minute it was open because I love your books. I love mysteries, and they all terrified me in different ways. So welcome. I'm really excited. I always kick it off with this question. So I apologize for those of you who have done this one before, but not being a published author, I think it would be so exciting to have my first like published book like in my hands, whether it's from the publisher or I go to the bookstore and I buy it, etc. So when you got your first like published book, and it's all done, it's edited, it's in your possession. Do you remember what you did? Natalie's shaking her head. Natalie, go ahead.
I do, because it's not what most people do. So I got my book, and I really had like, Margaret knows this, like she knows this story. Like I have the opposite reaction of most baby authors. I like saw it in a box and I was like, I'm going to walk past that for a while because I just cannot do with that. So then I finally opened the box because I knew what it was. And I'm like, you have to do the thing. You have to get in there and see it. And like, it's real then. So I pick up the book and I open it to like the middle. And the very first sentence I read, I'm like, maybe I should have written that differently. And I like threw the book in the corner and I was like, I can't do anything else. I got to go write a book or something. So I don't know. I think there's so little control. There's like a real excitement to it, but at that point it belongs to the reader. So it's very different. It was not what I thought. I think a lot of people go and take pictures and I wish I had that reaction because I was really just a nervous wreck. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know how people would feel about it. So yeah, it was very different, but it all worked out. It all worked out well. So
I remember the first time a lot. I remember the first time that I saw, it was my first book and I saw it at Barnes and Noble. And so I was actually getting ready to fly. We were going on tour and a friend of mine who was largely pregnant met me at the store. She's like, I want to be with you and do this thing. And your opening day, whatever. And I was like, okay, great. So we go to the store, we go to Barnes and Noble and we found my drink, my Not a Drop to Drink, and it was on an end cap and we were all excited. And she was like hugely like 9 months pregnant. And she's like, Mindy, you're book pregnant. Like you should, we're going to take a funny picture. So we started shoving books under my shirt to make me book pregnant and security came over. Because they thought I was stealing books. And I'm like, no, we're doing it. Never, never mind. So I almost got arrested and I almost missed my flight to go on tour. And so that was my experience. And then after that, I never tried to be cute again. I was like, all right, we're done. We're done being clever. We're just going to show up and look at the book and hey.
Mar, go ahead.
That story came up with another story. So there you go.
Yeah, well, it's not quite as fantastic an anecdote as that, but Natalie was saying with your first book, you actually sort of felt a bit of horror at it, and I can relate to that. My first novel is this one, and not the published copy, I guess, but the advanced reader copy, the like arc for corrections that they sent, which for my most recent one, they didn't do a physical one, but this was sort of the first time I'd physically held it, and I was like, ooh, it looks kind of cool, and I opened it, and I read the very first line of the entire book, and there was a massive typo in the very first line that somehow I had not caught throughout. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of phases in the editing process. I think it might have gotten introduced later, but like the copy editors, they thought I was being artistic, I think, is how like some people had seen it and been like, oh yeah, that must have just been a choice. It was not, it was a typo. So I was horrified.
Did you have a nervous breakdown? I would have just been like, gosh.
I think you go with it was an artistic thing, like from then on, just like, oh yes, I intended to do that. That is just a nice excuse. I feel like I have unfortunately not read Mar's first book, but I want to kind of get a plug in for Natalie that her first book is really good. So don't think that just because of that one little sentence that there might be a problem. You should read all of her books. But I have told my story a lot because I'm really old and it was way back in I'm trying to think. The book came out in 1995, so it was early in 1995. The whole progress of like selling my first book and then having it, going through the editing cycle and having it come out, it went at the same time. I was pregnant with my second child. My husband and our daughter, who was 1.5 at that time, and I moved from Illinois to a town in Pennsylvania where we knew nobody. And so it was just such an overwhelming time in general that sadly, I don't think, like when that first box of books came, I don't know that I was I didn't have a spare moment to be like, oh, yes, this is what I've been dreaming of for years. This finally came to pass. And I was thinking, hearing Mindy's story about, this may have been the very first book signing I did. There was a lovely bookstore close to where we lived then, and they very kindly invited me to do a book signing. And you know, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what an honor it was that they were extending the invitation. And so it was just kind of down the hill for me. It was very close by, and there were 32 other things going on that particular day. And I'm sure I was sleep deprived because of having a baby. And I showed up at this book signing, and the only writing implements I had in my purse were crayons. So that, I think that right there tells what my life was like at that point.
I mean, but if you were to be signing books in crayons, can you imagine the people who now, 40 plus books later, best-selling author, has this copy
It was just
signed by you with crayons? I mean, you could get a lot of money for that. So anybody in the audience, if you have that book.
Although I will say, the bookseller very kindly was like, here, we do have pens here. Here, it's yours now.
Oh, in my mind, it was just so much cooler having written in.
Yeah, I know. Now that I think about it, I should have just signed it. Well, I have a really long name, and it's hard to write all of that in crayon. So
true. Yeah, I will agree. Crayons are overrated. They're fun for coloring. But okay. Well, like I said, I stayed up very late, slept with the light on, had the heebie-jeebies for a long time while reading all of your books. And I, just to kind of kick it off again, how do you decide, or maybe what is your inspiration behind, and now we'll just talk about like the books that you have like right now. So like your 2022 Ohioana book, like how were you inspired to write these novels? And they're all vast and different. So I'll kick it off with Mar. So just give us like a brief description of your book, and then maybe what inspired you to write it, because they're all so interesting and different. I just think it'd be really fun to hear.
Okay, brief description. The Ghost in Your House. It is about Hi is the ghost in your house. She is not dead, she's invisible. So it's about a girl and her mother who are invisible, have been visible their whole lives. They just sort of travel around the country, living in rich people's houses like ghosts, occasionally getting exorcised. And then this is a story of what happens when she finally reveals herself to someone, I guess, and makes friends for the first time. Being invisible is really good for shoplifting, but really bad for making friends. How did I get the idea? For me, ideas for stories, which I always have far too many, they always start with something very, very small, often just like a line or an image that kind of percolates in my brain for, years, maybe kind of bounces around, maybe accumulates a few more lines or images along with it, and then goes through many iterations. So honestly, even though it was like more than 10 years ago, I think the idea for this one first really started with a Halloween party is an important scene in this book. And so I think it started with a Halloween party that I went to in college. I wore a full face mask just because I did. And there was like a drunk girl at the party who was like really mad that she couldn't tell who I was. And, was like, who are you? And like tried to like pull off my mask at one point. And that I just somewhere that lodged in the back of my head. And I imagined, what if she had pulled off my mask and beneath it had been nothing, absolutely nothing. Just something that happens. Yes. So, but yeah, but it was years until that eventually like turned into anything. It kind of just floated around for a long time.
Oh, I love that. Mindy, I'm going to turn it to you. I'm just going in circle on my computer.
Okay. So my series, my newest series right now, it's all based on Edgar Allan Poe short stories. So The Last Laugh is the second one. The Initial Insult is the first one that came out last year. So where I got the idea, like Mara said, you can get them from the weirdest moments. Something just percolates, something drops, something snaps, and things grow out of it. So I was driving home from the library, the school that I used to work at. I was substituting at the time. This was in 2018. I was driving home and a cat ran out in front of my car in town and I hit the brakes. I will always brake for animals, humans, or like 50-50, but I braked for the cat and it ran away, like it got away, and I was really, really happy. But it was a black cat, and I was driving home, and I was just like, man, a lot of people would say black cat crosses your path, that's bad luck. But the way my brain works was I immediately followed back with, well, but Edgar Allan Poe used a black cat as like an arbiter of justice and like helping to solve a murder. And maybe I just like inadvertently helped that cat like go serve up some justice to somebody, right? So then I started thinking about that, and I was like, well, why have you never used any Edgar Allan Poe stories in your work? Has anybody ever taken the black cat and used that for a YA novel? And then my brain was like, well, why stop at the black cat? Most freshman classes read the Cask of Amontillado, use the Cask of Amontillado. And then like, why are you limiting yourself? Use all these things. So it's a 7-minute drive from the school to my house. And I had basically the layout and the plots for both books in 7 minutes, simply because I'm really familiar with Poe. And I was like, well, I could use this, I could use that, I could do that, I could do this. And so what I ended up doing was taking, for the first book, The Initial Insult, it's the Cask of Amontillado, the Black Cat, and the Mask of the Red Death. And so it's a murder mystery set in a really small town in Ohio, and it pulls from all three of those elements. And it uses the Cask of Amontillado by having two former best friends that are now enemies who have beefs with each other. And one of them hits the other over the head with a brick and takes her down in the basement and starts bricking her up in a coal chute at this huge party out in the middle of nowhere to try to get some answers out of her about a murder that happened 7 years ago. And then the Black Cat comes into it because about a couple miles down the road from this party, there's a Tiger King type situation, and the panther escapes. And the panther shows up at the kegger. And then the Mask of the Red Death plays into it because there's a really viral flu going around, and the flu shows up at the party and everybody starts puking. So you've got a murder going down in the basement and drunk kids on the second floor and a panther circling the house outside, because that's what my high school life was like. So I was just like, this is what we're going to do, and it's going to be fun, right? So this was 2018. And I pitched this idea to my editor, and he was like, I absolutely love this. This is fantastic. And we're going to do this, but how in the world are we going to pitch this book? Like, how in the world are we going to explain this to people? Then 2019 happened, and then 2020 happened. And people read this book and they're like, man, it is so easy to see all of your influences. Clearly you watched the Tiger King and you wrote this during the pandemic. It's like, no, actually, I'm pretty sure that I caused both of those things, because I had these thoughts and I put them all together, and then they both happened.
We now know who to blame for. It was all Mindy.
It's the cat that ran in front of my car. That's who to blame. Yeah.
Oh, cat. Natalie, how about you?
We're rearranged differently. I thought Margaret was next. So I think that it's funny. We get this question a lot. Authors get that question. Where do you come up with your ideas? So I always feel like, where do they come from? I really don't exactly know. Each one has its own place of, origin or whatnot, until I haven't had much coffee this morning. At any rate, I realized recently at a school visit, somebody asked it in a slightly different way. And I'm like, oh my gosh, all of my ideas come from the worst case scenario, what if game. So I, just like Mar, I always have one scene, one line, one little tiny thing, nugget that comes into my brain out of nowhere. And it starts a spiral of, well, how could that be worse? So the one that happened for 7 Dirty Secrets, which is a book about a scavenger hunt gone terribly wrong, where the answers basically lead our main character back to the worst skeleton in her closet, the dirtiest secret she has. That book started when I had an envelope arrive on my desk, and it was handwritten to me in kind of pretty font, really heavy parchment. And it was a little weird. I was like, why is this here? Who is this? It wasn't a business letter. It looked very odd. It was fine. There was nothing interesting inside of it. It just, the way it was written, it almost looked like calligraphy. It looked like a gift. And I'm like, why is this here? It had arrived in a weird time. I ran to the bathroom, I came back, here it is. What the hell? So I'm looking at it. I don't understand. And I think what happened for me is I started going down a train of what if this wasn't from George down the road? What if this was from someone I didn't know? What if it was a scavenger hunt? what if the scavenger hunt was digging into some dirty secret from my past? What if, so I started going down the hill of like, gifts in general can be very creepy. If you don't want them, or if you don't know who's giving them to you, you do not want that gift. So I think this book starts with the main character who steps out of her shower in her bathroom to find a gift on her bathroom sink. It was not there when she got in the shower, and it is not from someone she knows, and it is an invitation to a scavenger hunt. So I think that just kind of that cycle of how could this get worse? And that actually is how every book of mine is built. Like, well, what if it got even worse than that? What would be even worse than this? What would be even worse than that? And I think that's really what keeps the suspense of books going to me, is when you're doing that as a reader, like, well, I can't get any worse. Oh my gosh, it just got worse. Like, that's what keeps you reading mystery.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, good point. Also glad that yours wasn't a creepy scavenger hunt. Margaret, how about you?
Sure. I think this is probably the point where I need to point out that this panel is both for middle grade readers, kind of the tweens in the title, and also for young adult novel readers, the teen part of it. And those two categories often bleed together, but I'm the tween side of things. So I think I'm still traumatized by reading the Cask of Amontillado in freshman English when I was in high school. So I am not as scary as Mindy. I just want to point that out. Or to the extent that I am as scary as Mindy, it is in a totally different way. The School for Whatnots, I'll kind of give you the little summary of it and then explain where it came from. But it's about two kids who have been best friends since kindergarten. At the end of 5th grade, one of the kids, Josie, kind of pulls the other kid aside and tells him a secret. She tells Max that they may never be allowed to see each other ever again. And Max is totally baffled by this. It's come out of nowhere. And he's like, what are you talking about? We were best friends. There's no way we would not be allowed to see each other again. Well, she can't explain at that particular moment. Max goes home, goes up to his room, finds a note that she has left for him in a place that only he would see. And what the note says is, no matter what anyone tells you, I'm real. So that's kind of what I'll just leave you with for how the book begins. It's full of lots of twists and turns and surprises. And the inspiration for this book was one of the weirdest things that's ever happened as far as an inspiration for a book. I was reading book reviews in Publishers Weekly, and I saw just the title of another author's book. And immediately I was overcome with this horrible sense of jealousy, because the one word title was kind of a made up word. It was like the combination of two different words. And just looking at that, I was like, oh, I know exactly what that book is about. That is such a brilliant idea. I am so jealous that this other author thought of this idea before I did. And oh, I would have loved to have written that. And then I read the review itself, and I was totally wrong about what I thought that book was about. And it was a really interesting sounding book, but it was not at all what I thought it was. And at that point, I was kind of like, oh, so this idea that I just thought of, that I thought was so brilliant, that I thought was already taken, it's not taken. I can write this idea. And so it was a really fun process. And I will give credit to the other author. I will not tell you the name of the book because I think it gives away something about this book, but not everything. But the author's name was M.M. Vaughn, Vaughan. So if you really want to work for it, you can look up that author and you can probably find out what this word is and kind of figure out part of the School for Whatnots.
Oh, nice. See, like they come from like all over the place. Yeah, cool. Well, so we have some questions, so I'm going to jump right in. Lisa Bonus, I'm not sure how you pronounce the last name, actually has like all of my questions. So she has 3. So how did you get started writing in this genre? Are you writing the types of books you liked to read? And do you ever scare yourself? So how did you get started writing in this genre? Are you writing the types of books that you like to read? And do you ever scare yourself while writing? And I'll go backwards. So Margaret, I know you just finished, but I'll work my way backwards.
Yeah, I I liked reading all sorts of different, well, I still do like reading all sorts of different types of books. So yeah, I think I do write the same types of books that I like to read. Maybe not so much what I liked to read as a kid. I think I read a lot of just kind of slice of life type things. And so when I tell some of the books that I loved to read as a kid, people are like, and you got from that to dystopia? How did that work? But it was largely because I just like to read a huge variety of things, that a lot of my books tend to defy genre.
Nice. And do you ever scare yourself while you were writing?
Oh, I'm sorry. Forgot the second part of the question. I'm actually in a hotel room in Massachusetts right now, and I can hear vacuuming out in the hall. And I was like, I need to mute myself immediately. So I forgot the second part of the question. But sometimes I scare myself about the sociological implications of the books, but not so much the creepy factor.
Nice. Natalie, so how did you get started writing this genre? Do you typically read these books, and do you ever scare yourself?
So I started writing this genre. I actually if you know anything about my writing at all, I started writing epic fantasy, which is really funny. If you think about my voice at all in any way, that does not fit. So eventually I started realizing that I wanted to turn everything into a thriller. I just started turning epic fantasy, and then there was somebody behind the door, and like, I just can't help it. Like, I always want that suspense. As a reader, I'm very attracted to books that keep me up too late for whatever reason. But my brand of doing that is through fear. Probably says something about me a psychiatrist would have fun with, but that's okay. I started, do I read this kind of book? Yes, I read a ton of these, but I read everything. And I don't tend to read thrillers right now while I'm writing them. I may read them in between, but I don't, it's not that you would ever like steal, but it's a little confusing to have 2 or 3 thrillers in your head at the same time. So I'm writing 2 separate books in 2 separate genres. So that would be a little hard for me to continue to do mysteries and thrillers and read them at the same time. But I read all over the place. In fact, I think it's my biggest piece of advice for anybody that wants to be a writer. I read everything: nonfiction, poetry, essays, political, it doesn't matter. I'm all over the map. And I think that really informs you as a writer and makes you stronger. So I actually probably read far fewer mysteries and thrillers than I ever did. But I did read them a lot when I was growing up, and then early on in my writing. And then, do I ever scare myself? This is really funny. This came up with my publishing house yesterday. I was talking to my editor about a book that I have been struggling to grapple with. Like, I really just couldn't find my feet with a couple aspects of this book. And it's fine, I'll get it together. But I had an experience when I was working through my edits where a scene started to give me goosebumps and freaked me out a little bit. And I'm like, I think I got it. It freaked me out, so I'm good. And that's actually an indicator to me of when I have a book under control, is when it is flipping me out a little bit. Because that to me means I'm not fully in control of the story anymore. I mean, of course you are, you're the author, but when your story begins to take a life of its own and get a little beyond your planning, and it's kind of going into directions slightly here or there where you're like, oh, I didn't quite expect that, and I don't exactly know where I'm going with it, that's when I think I really know a book has become a real living story. Sometimes that happens really early. Sometimes it happens in edits. Sometimes it's beginning to end. Just kind of depends. But yes, I definitely scare myself, and I had to get up. Like, I was like, okay, I got to walk away for just a moment. You know, it's fine. And it feels silly because, you know, you're like, I'm writing this. Why is this scary to me? But it's good. It's a good sign.
Or that's another thriller that you just described. So jot down that idea. The book becomes its own entity. And Mindy, how about you?
I literally never scare myself. So that's something that people do ask. They're like, does it bother you to write all this dark stuff, all this scary stuff, all this weird stuff? Does it bother you to do all these horrible things to your characters? No, never, not at all. If I were to suddenly impulsively start writing a rom-com, then I'd be scared. And I would throw my laptop out the window and I'd be like, this is wrong. Like, the world is upside down now, and this is not okay. If I ever wrote a totally happy ending, I would be like, and now we're worried. So no, nothing bothers me when it comes to that. Well, as far as why I write what I write the books that I wish I would have had when I was a kid and when I was younger, when I was growing up. And I'm sure this is also true for most of us. All the books that I was reading, with very few exceptions, being like Christopher Pike, Lois Duncan, R.L. Stein, and like every now and then Judy Blume, they would go there, but not often, and it's only a handful of books. They never went quite as far. They only went as far as like society would allow them to. So when I was growing up, I wanted to read those things. I wanted to read scary things, dark things, complex things, and they weren't available to me. And it made me really sad. So it's like, I always tell people, well, the example of a plot of a book that I would have been handed to read in 5th or 6th grade would have gone something like, I really want a dog, but I can't have a dog because my mom's allergic to dogs. And I found a puppy on the way home from school and I brought it home and I'm hiding it in my basement. And I hope mom doesn't find out because I will get in trouble. And that was the plot. So I went from reading that to reading Cujo in 5th grade because it was sitting on my mom's nightstand and I was like, this looks good. And I picked it up and I started reading it. And in this book, the dog is definitely going to kill your mom. It's not allergies. It's because the dog is actually the devil. And I'm like, oh, that's a plot. That is a plot. You know, and I got like super excited because I literally always wanted to be a writer my entire life, but everything I thought about and all the things I wanted to write and all of my thoughts were dark or weird or wrong or scary. And I thought that you literally weren't allowed to write these things, that they were not okay, because everything I was given to read was clean. It was didactic. If somebody lit a cigarette, a piano fell on their head. Don't smoke, kids, right? Like it was always like super like antiseptic almost. And so when I started reading books that were like completely inappropriate for me, I was like, oh, this is great, right? This is what I want. So when I went to college, I went to Otterbein and then I graduated and then came home and I started working as a librarian in my local school district that I had graduated from. And there are books by Ellen Hopkins, there are books by John Green, there are all these books by people about things that are real in real life. And some of it isn't always pretty and beautiful. And I was like, oh, you can do this now? And the district librarian, who was my boss, was like, yes, you can do this now. And I was like, I want to write for teens because I want to write the books that I wish I had when I was younger. And so that's what I write about. I write across all different genres. I write fantasy, I write thriller, I like write psychological thriller, I write murder mysteries, I write issue books. I have all different types of books. So I've written about the opioid epidemic, rape culture. I've written high fantasy. I've written dystopian. I will write anything, but you can always count on what Natalie was saying. How do we make this worse? Right? Always.
I love it. Mar.
Like it's hard to go last because my brain is just spinning with all the neat things that everyone else said. I was like, in terms of like writing in this genre, I often struggle with what genre any of my books are. I mean, I think we all nodded simultaneously when Natalie was saying like, I read widely, I read lots of different things. Yes, I do too. I always have. And so I'm definitely writing the kind of books that I would like to read. But the only sort of unifying factor I feel like is weird. I like to read things that are a little weird. And I will also say, despite the fact that 2 of the 3 books I have out have the word ghost in the title, I was never really, I have a thing where I often didn't think of them as dark or creepy. And my first novel that came out, there was a review that called it like uncompromisingly dark, I think. And I was like, what? I thought this was a fun adventure. And that actually happened. That's a slight exaggeration, but I think I just sort of have, I guess like Mindy, dark thoughts. I do. I have a lot of dark thoughts and weird thoughts. And that kind of just sort of creeps its way into my books. And I think I maybe have a slightly different frame of reference. I actually have a book for like middle grade, more for tweens, coming out in the fall as well. And when the editor was reading a first draft, she was saying that she was worried that it was too scary. And again, I was like, no, this is fun and silly. I mean, yes, many of the main characters are giant spiders, but I was like, no, this is like a fun, delightful, I don't know. So yes, I think maybe my frame of reference for what's scary and what isn't be a little skewed, or even what I'm writing, but I am always trying to write something that I would like to read now, but also when I'm writing about young people, I definitely think about what I would have wanted to read as a teen, which has to do with, morally complex characters. Queer representation at this point is definitely something that's very important for everybody of any age, but especially if you're a teen, you're going to see yourself reflected in books. It's super important. And have I ever scared myself? Recently, I had my first experience of doing that, where I often lay awake at night because I'm an insomniac and think about, whatever story I'm working on. And I guess because I already sort of write slightly weird, creepy, dark things, my editor was like, I'd like to see you really go like full in horror. And I was like, okay. So I decided to try that. And I've been working on a book that's about, very appropriate for the medium right here, about live streaming and haunted actual ghosts, haunted live stream and some sort of strange creepypasta stuff. Like imagine if we just sort of started glitching out right now and then our screens went dark and once laying awake at night, working through a scene for the sort of Twitch horror novel that I'm calling it conceptually. I did scare myself and I was like, that's probably good. Probably a good sign.
Not gonna lie, you have just scared me as we are on live stream. I was like, well, great. If something happens right now, that's it. I'm done.
Yeah. If there was a shadowy figure in this doorway, and you said, who is that? And I'm like, there's nobody there, but you could see it. That's the scene. That's the scene, basically. So.
We have a lot of questions, but I have a very funny story that happened to me on a Zoom with a kid. Something was behind him. It was his jacket. But I legitimately, because I read these books and I had scared myself and I told the student and they thought it was hilarious. Okay. Next question. This is from Stephen Smith. I have a story with an 11-year-old protagonist who can occasionally hear thoughts of others. How to handle the fact that those are often disturbing? And that's just a general open to everybody. So the question again was,
I would have Margaret take that because she writes for middle grade and then Mar as well. Because my advice would be like, go hardcore, go all the way, but that's not good for middle grade. So.
Well, I actually think it depends. Like it could be an 11-year-old kid and an adult novel. So, if you want to go in that direction, it can be go as dark as you want to go. There are certain things with middle grade fiction that, it's really hard to figure out as far as what the boundaries are, because it's kind of an ever shifting line. And obviously different kids have different capacity for being okay with reading scary things or not being okay with reading scary things. And publishers are just trying to find what the line is. So I guess my advice would be write it the way you want to write it, and then decide whether that changes the audience that you're writing it for, or if you want to change the way it's written in order to suit a particular audience. But Mar may have different advice, so I'll kick it over to you.
A second to finally unmute, but no, I think that sounds like perfect advice. And I guess I would have said a similar thing, which is, something I struggle with a little bit now that I am, in the business of writing and delivering a product to an editor. And, there's these sort of genre expectations and thinking about audience. But I do try to, when I'm actually just drafting, block a lot of that out. I write things that are sometimes sort of fantasy, but then they're like slipping into something else. And I write for young adults, I write for younger people. I always have so many projects going on. I guess what I mean is when I'm actually writing, I often, or at least in the early drafts, I'm not really thinking about genre. And some people would maybe say that's like a bad thing to do and you should really be, targeting your audience or whatever. But I try to, at least in the early stages, because otherwise it's just stifling for me, just try to like explore the story, explore where it wants to go. And then later there will be some intense editing that I may very well need to, shift it in one direction or another. But and you said, there can be a book that has a young character that is, or like even a young narrator, like Room, for instance, is one of those that's like dealing with very dark things through the eyes of a child. Or I'm always working on way too many projects. I'm working on another sort of story that the main character is a teenager, but the book like opens right away with matricide. And I think that one, if I ever finish it, might not be targeted at young adults. I don't know, not that young adults can't handle like dark shit, but like if they know that they can handle dark shit, they'll just read the books for adults. Like that's what I did. I think Mindy said that. Oh, also just realized I swore. Apologies. Speaking of not being fully aware of my audience,
no, that was perfect. That was actually, I was sitting here when Meg asked at the beginning, she was like, do you want closed captioning? I was like, well, I mean, do you? Because it's like, as soon as one of us swears, there's no covering it up. And I was like, it's going to be me. I'm so glad it was Mar.
You're welcome.
Our next question from Will. What was the most frustrating part of being a young writer and how did you overcome it? And the question is actually from an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old. I'm guessing they have young writers at home. But again, what was the most frustrating part of being a young writer and how did you overcome it? And I'm just going to open it up to whoever wants to jump in.
I think for me, it was like I said before, everything I wanted to write seemed inappropriate. Like everything in my world was telling me that my thoughts and the way that I thought and the stories I wanted to tell were too dark, too scary, wrong. And the way I got over that was that I just decided, screw it. I'm me. I'm going to write what I write and think the way I think, and I'm not changing for other people. But the other thing, and I think the most important advice for young writers is that right now, Mar said it perfectly. She was like, now I'm in the business and I have to think about a product and my audience and delivering something that's saleable. You don't have to worry about that right now. Write and have fun. Write and have fun. Don't write thinking I want to get published and I want to do this and I want to do this for a living. Right now, you have this amazing freedom and this ability to write and be free and just do it for fun. Do that. Do that. And don't think about anything else. Just have fun with it. I've been writing. So basically, long story short, my very first novel was sold like when it was already finished. And that was, 12 years ago now. Ever since then, I've been writing on spec, which means that I pitched a novel. They said, yes, that sounds great. They bought it. And then I had to write it. So for 12 years, I've been writing to like a paycheck, more or less. It doesn't mean I don't love my books. It means that I had an idea. Somebody paid me for it. Now I have to write that book. If I get tired of it, if something new and shiny comes along and I want to write that instead, I don't get to. I have to write for a living now. And it's wonderful. I wouldn't trade this for anything. I love my life and I love my job, but you have to always be taking into the business consideration side of things. Just write and have fun right now. You're 9, you're 11, have a good time. I also want to add, and I tell all young writers this, I didn't finish a novel until I was 21. So don't think, oh my gosh, I've never finished anything. I'm not really a writer. I can't punch through a beginning, a middle, and an end. Don't worry about it. Have fun right now. Just do your thing and enjoy it.
I would say the most frustrating thing when I was a young writer was that in my head, the idea was just wonderful, like the best thing ever. And then I would write it down and it was not wonderful. It would, maybe you've seen memes on social media somewhere where it's like the idea in your head is Disney World. And then what you get down on paper is a rock and a stick. And, there's contrast between the glorious idea that you think the idea should be, and then what it's not. And that was hugely frustrating for me because I loved those ideas and I wanted to do them justice. And I would say the thing that got me past that was just continuing to write and not giving up because it was frustrating. Maybe I would give up on that particular idea, but I didn't give up on writing. And I mean, there's still, it's kind of that the more you practice at something, the better you get at it. And I have a vivid memory of after spending 4 years working as a newspaper reporter and just writing fiction on the side, and having had that experience of the ideas just weren't working out the way I thought, kind of the first time after spending all this time writing professionally, then I was writing something that was fiction. I'm like, oh, this is better. It's not necessarily exactly what it needs to be yet, but this is better. This is getting there. And it really was like, well, yeah, I'm writing daily. I'm writing all the time. And you would hope that I would get better. So that's really how it works. I would also say, don't put pressure on yourself, kind of reiterating what Mindy said. I think a lot of people think, if I don't get published by the time I'm 18, hang it up. And that's not at all the case. Like if you're 80, keep writing. You just never know.
It's so true. And I was thinking a lot of the same things Margaret was. I know when I was younger, I had a lot of what Mindy said. I never finished anything. I thought I couldn't. I had a lot of times where I'd have a great idea. It wouldn't come out well. And then another thing that I encountered a lot is I would have a great idea and I would start writing it, and then I couldn't figure out what happened next. And I'd start a great idea, and then it really kind of fell apart and I couldn't finish the book. And I realized the idea maybe wasn't as good. And it was really hard because I had this incredible idea and I couldn't figure it out. So while I do recommend having fun whenever you can, it's also okay if you feel frustrated sometimes with yourself, with your writing, with a story. That's okay. That's part of being a writer that we all deal with all the time. Still, I'm still published, and there are times when my story just will not come together and I'm frustrated. So that's okay. That's part of the writing process. So if you're feeling like, I don't know why I want to still write this story, it's frustrating me. We feel that way a lot, whether it's a book we want to write or we're contracted to write. I think we all go through that. So it's okay to have that. Just keep doing it. And don't be afraid if it's messy and not perfect right now. That's all. That's not telling you you're not a writer. So if you look at your work and you're like, I can't finish it, it's not that great, I'm really not this person. If you read my stuff, you would feel the same way about my things when I was 9 or 10. So you can still do this. Don't give up on yourself just because things aren't coming together yet. They will. Time is the teacher. Like, just keep doing it. And it's okay if it's not perfect right now.
I'll just briefly second everything everyone else said, especially about not putting too much pressure on yourself. Like, I remember being 16 and hearing of a 16-year-old who published a vampire novel and being like, oh God, I'm already behind. Yeah. Writing's a great thing because it's not like being an Olympic athlete or something where there's like a narrow window. You can always do it. I will say, I think the most frustrating thing for me as a young 9, 10 or whatever writer was actually loneliness. That might just be a me problem. I was a weird kid. I was often like alone in my room, just, scribbling, living in my head, living in these weird stories. And it made a big difference for me when I found other people who, were around my age and also loved writing. So might not be a problem for you, but if you can find a way to, because it can be kind of a lonely thing, writing. You do sort of almost inevitably spend a lot of time by yourself in your head. So if you can find a friend or maybe, community online, people to talk about writing, commiserate about writing, share your writing, that can make a huge difference.
I agree. And quick plug, at Thurber House, we do have those programs. It's the best part, is getting to see all these young writers come and share their ideas. So we have a lot of questions and only 13 minutes left. So rapid fire. So Heather C asks, where do you do your planning for your books? Post-its, whiteboard, notebook, etc. Have you considered sharing a page of your writer's notebook? Go.
I do zero planning, none. So no, I don't do notes. I don't brainstorm. I don't do anything. I don't have a wall with Post-its. I don't have strands of yarn going to different, I have nothing. So no, I can't ever share anything because it's all up here. It all stays up here. It's just a crock pot and it cooks and then it comes out in my first draft.
I actually have my current notebook right here. I bought myself a fancy one that's art by the same person who did the cover, and yeah, it's a bunch of like totally incomprehensible scribbles that even I can't really read, and also doodles, and just a line here, a line there. Read a scene, wait for bus. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And there's a limited. I don't know if anybody can see this, but
It's there.
like that. It's really hard to read. I have very messy handwriting. So I'll like scribble these notes, often like last thing at night or whatever. And then there's like a window of about maybe like 5 days where I need to transcribe that into typewritten, or I will forget what it said and never be able to read it ever again.
I don't do a ton of planning either. I call myself the queen of unfinished lists. So I'll be like, I have this idea and I'll write it, because I also, like Mindy, write on spec. Like, I'll give them an idea and they're like, we love it. And then the most common thing for me, like, I'll have like little doodles here and there. Mars, very similar. Like, I don't know what that says. I don't know what it means. That's cute. I like that drawing. Why did I doodle a grocery list in the middle of that? Here's my sushi order. So I don't have like cute writer notebooks. I wish I did. That'd be really awesome. But the greatest like example for me is like, I do a lot of that in my editing. So I do sell on spec. So I have given them like a 2-paragraph summary, and then I will write the entire draft and go, oh God, did I even come anywhere near what I told them I was writing? So that's usually my version of planning, is like a panic scene where the writer sits in the corner hyperventilating until she figures out, yeah, that's almost sort of kind of like what I said, but luckily often it veers wildly off of what I say, and they've been so gracious and lovely with me. So it's all worked out.
I think editors have learned to expect that. They know we're all weird. They're okay with that. That's where the ideas come from. This is my 47th book, and I think I have followed 47 different processes to get to the finished book, that I am not at all consistent in terms of sometimes the only planning takes place in my head. Sometimes I do a lot where I always write the books on the computer, but I do a lot that for whatever reason, I'm struggling with the book. So I do a lot of like writing by hand in a notebook where it's like, well, this can't happen because then that would happen. And then that would happen. And if that happens, that's not going to work. And so with some of my books, I do have a lot of notes that I have in a writer's notebook, and and it's not the least bit organized. There are like a variety of different things that I'm working on where it kind of bounces back and forth. I guess it's now a testament to what I was thinking about at the time that I was working on the book, but anybody else would be like, this makes no sense whatsoever. So I'm a lot like Mara in that.
Nice. So this one is from Chelsea, a two-parter. Which of your books would you like to see made into a film? First part. I'm sure you like all of your books as an author, but as a reader, which of your books is your favorite? So which book made into a film, and which of your books as a reader is your favorite?
I think anytime we get questions about any of my books being made into a movie would be awesome. So it's like, even if it's a bad movie, we have a saying in publishing, it's like a bad movie sells books. So, even if it's a horrible movie, it will sell copies of your book. So it's like the best possible advertisement for your book. All of my books being made into movies would be fantastic. My favorite book is a reader that's also hard. So it's kind of like having children. You're not supposed to have a favorite. But sometimes you do. And usually it's the newest one because it's the freshest. I'm sure Margaret, I can't even imagine her perspective, because it's like, people will talk to me about my first book, which came out in 2013, but I wrote it in 2010. And people will ask me questions about that book. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, I don't remember that scene. I don't know that character's name anymore. I can't remember my motivation for certain things. So it's like, I think that when it comes to favorites, I think the newest is freshest and the most exciting in your mind. As authors, we have to handle every book so many times before it finally gets to publication. So it's like, it's the one that you've had to touch the least. So far, I think it's the one that you still have the most intimate relationship with, the one that you most recently birthed. That's usually my favorite.
Well, I'll go next. My movie agent has told me that the best movie would be coming from Among the Hidden, that is the jewel of my books in terms of becoming a movie or a TV series. And it is currently under option. So, it's kind of one of those fingers crossed type situations. I think I had my first book optioned right after, maybe it wasn't even out yet, but because I remember I was covered with baby spit up when I was having the conversation with the movie producer. There was a phone call that was arranged, and as a new author, I was planning what I was going to wear to the premiere, that I was like, does the author get to walk on the red carpet? And that baby is now 27 years old. So, it didn't happen at that point. So I don't hold my breath about movie or TV possibilities, but it does seem like we're kind of in a golden age for that, with YA and middle grade books being adapted. So that's a hopeful thing. And I cannot choose what is my favorite to read. I think that it's impossible for me to read any of my work the way anybody else would be reading my work. I'm just too close to it. And I'm not just reading what's on the page. I'm not reading it as a story. I'm remembering the frustration I had when I was writing it, or I can see all the problems, all the things that I thought, it's kind of like, you don't want to see the man behind the curtain if you're in Oz. And I always see the man behind the curtain. So I don't think I can read it as a normal reader.
I just want to say I loved that book when I was a kid, that book series.
Thanks.
Definitely watched that movie. All my friends are always like, oh, should just be made into a movie. And I'm like, well, it's already a book, you know, it's fine. But yeah, I would obviously be delighted. I really struggle to go back and read something that it's, you know, finished, you know, in that it's out there and I can't change it anymore. But I do love like current projects sometimes, because you have to read them so many times. When I go back and I read something and I don't remember writing it, you know, because it's just been long enough, or I have a bad memory, and I'm like, oh, it's not bad. So it is really fun to be able to go back. Again, usually I can't do it when it's actually out, but I'd have definitely encountered like drafts where, because often in my process, I'll like write something. I mean, it's harder now because I'm also writing things on spec, but like often in my process, it would be like, I would write a draft and then put it away for like a year and then try to come back at it with fresh eyes. And so the most fun is when you can't remember writing it. You're like, oh.
I would echo everything, really, honestly. Like I couldn't possibly pick a favorite book. Like that's, first of all, I'm like Margaret, you're just too involved in it. I can't see it the way a reader does, which actually is why I so treasure a book that can really get me. Now that I'm a writer, a lot of books I can be like, oh, well, okay, I see how you structured this and I know what's coming here. So when a book really gets me and I'm like, I have no idea what you're doing and I love it and it's brilliant, or it just wraps me up in the language or the voice, I love that in a way I don't think I ever have, because it's a little harder for me to get taken out. I started reading like a lot of people. It let me escape everything that was happening in my world, everything that was hard. And now I find that to be a little more difficult because it is a lot of my world is writing. So I really treasure when something can pull me out. And having a favorite is, I think, just really tough to pick. I have characters I loved a lot. And I think there are moments when I'm like, man, I'd love to read this character if I didn't write them though, because I wrote it, I'll always have that critical, like, should I have done this? Should I have done that? And like Mar said, once it's out, it's done. You can't do anything. And as for movies, like Margaret, I've had a lot of very exciting phone calls, and at first they were very exciting and then they get a lot less exciting. But I think it would be amazing for me to see a movie, not just because they sell books, they do, but also it's kind of exciting when I run into a fan fiction or something that somebody will tell me they had this idea with my book and they took it in this direction. That's really fun for me. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. I love hearing other people's interpretations on a situation and a story that I put out there. So I think I would love seeing that. Like, how would a filmmaker do this? Like, in particular, like 5 Total Strangers, a lot of that book is set in a car. Like, how would they do it? Like, it's really, I would love to see some of my books, like how they would interpret it and how they would work with the material and bring it into life. So I think it would be really fun for that reason, but I certainly would not say no to any of them. So there's that.
Wonderful. Well, we only have 2 minutes left, so I apologize to Anonymous and also to Julia. We didn't get to your questions. I did put all of the authors' websites in the chat. I accidentally put authors 'S. That is a typo. That's grammatically incorrect. I apologize. But the authors' websites are in the chat. I highly recommend going to them. You can see all their back titles. I highly recommend all of them. They're amazing. As you can tell, they're also amazing people. I have on more than one occasion slept with a light on after reading some of these. Not gonna lie, I have creeped myself out, but I highly recommend it. Thank you, panelists. So thank you, Mar and Mindy and Natalie and Margaret. It was so amazing, and I cannot wait until we can do this in person again next year. Also, we were talking about behind the curtain, and just a quick shout out to Miriam and Courtney from Ohioana, who I know are behind the curtain from Ohioana, at least in this session, but also all of Ohioana. They are a very small staff. So just like a huge shout out. This is a big undertaking. So thank you to Ohioana. Again, thank you to the sponsors who are listed on Ohioana's website, who make this amazing event possible. Please, please, please buy the books. They are amazing. I put my little read shirt on today. Please buy them from the Book Loft, our lovely local independent bookstore. I believe yesterday was even Independent Bookstore Day. So please buy their books. Let's see. I think oh, go ahead, Mark.
I say, if you want a signed copy, I'm actually going to be at Book Loft from 1 to 2 p.m. tomorrow.
Yay! Yes. So go out. You can get a signed copy of the Book Loft tomorrow from 1 to 2 p.m. Follow them on all of their socials. Visit their website. Again, they're amazing people, amazing authors. Thank you to everyone who tuned in today. Just have a great day. It's a perfect day to curl up and read. So I highly recommend grabbing one of these books. So thank you again. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.